My name is Clara Whitmore, and I'm 26 years old. Tonight, every eye in the ballroom is on my mother-in-law, Margaret Langford, the woman who once smiled while taking everything that mattered to me. Crystal chandeliers glimmer above her as the guild chairwoman steps to the stage. The air feels thick, heavy, like it knows a secret waiting to explode. Margaret lifts her glass, confident and calm, the queen of perfection. But I see it, the faint tremor in her hand, the crack behind her pearls. She doesn't know that the story she's built is about to crumble. The chairwoman clears her throat. My heart beats once, twice. And now, she says, we must correct a mistake. Margaret freezes. And when she hears her name, she turns pale, never realizing her own pride had written this ending. If you've ever seen someone underestimate you, stay with me. Like this video, comment your guess, and subscribe, because this story is just beginning. I grew up in a small town in Vermont where mornings smelled like rain and sawdust. My father built watches in a workshop behind our house, and my mother restored old jewelry for a living. She used to say, "Every piece has a story, Clara. You just have to listen before you fix it." I didn't realize then how those words would follow me into a world that didn't listen at all. I met Evan Langford at an art exhibit in Boston. I was 24, a freelance muralist barely paying rent, standing beside a painting that nobody had bid on. He wore a gray suit and looked too polished for the peeling brick walls of a gallery. But he stopped at my piece and stared longer than anyone else had all night. He didn't talk about price or style. He asked what I was trying to say with the colors. I remember thinking he actually wanted to understand. That was new to me. We talked until the gallery lights went off, and he offered to walk me home. His world sounded like something out of a movie, country clubs, holiday estates, summers in Maine, but he spoke about it with such humility that I thought maybe, just maybe, love could exist without judgment. When he proposed 2 years later, in the middle of a park surrounded by autumn leaves, I said yes before he even finished the question. I thought my life had finally opened up like one of my murals, bright, full of possibility. But the first time I met his mother, I realized not everyone was happy about new colors on their perfect walls. Margaret Langford greeted me with a smile that felt too rehearsed. Her voice was soft but clipped, every word measured like she was choosing which ones were safe to touch me with. "So you're Clara," she said, looking me up and down like she was checking the tags on a dress. "An artist." How refreshing. That word. Refreshing. It sounded polite, but it stung like lemon in a paper cut. Her home was like a museum. Cold marble, golden picture frames, portraits of Langfords who looked down on me from every wall. I tried to be gracious, to make conversation about her roses and the antique furniture. But she only half listened, nodding like she was humoring a child. Evan held my hand under the table during dinner. I remember thinking I could survive her chill as long as he kept that warmth close. He was the bridge between her world and mine, and I believed love could cover any distance. When we got married, she gave me a diamond bracelet from her own collection. "A family piece," she said. "It'll help you fit in." I smiled and thanked her, not realizing that fit in meant disappear a little. At first, life in the Langford mansion felt like a dream. Evan was kind, always defending my work when his family teased my little painting hobby. I spent mornings sketching by the sunroom window, afternoons helping with charity designs for the Women's Guild, and evenings listening to Evan tell stories about his father. But slowly, things began to shift. The maids started calling me with that careful hesitation reserved for people they didn't think would last long. Margaret would invite her friends over and compliment my rustic charm in front of them. They'd laugh lightly, not at me, but around me, like I wasn't part of the joke. I told myself it was harmless. I was new. Different. They'd get used to me. One afternoon, Margaret came into my studio while I was painting. She walked around the easel, looking at my half-finished canvas of a sunrise over Lake Champlain. "You're very talented," she said, voice sweet as honey left too long in the jar. "But perhaps you could paint something more refined. People here prefer landscapes of Tuscany or Paris. Vermont is a bit too simple, don't you think?" I forced a smile. "It's where I'm from." "Of course." She smiled back. "And it shows." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Evan, listening to the quiet hum of the city through the window. He was everything I'd dreamed of, but I could feel the invisible wall between us and the family we both belonged to now. I didn't blame him. He loved his mother, and I never wanted to be the reason they argued. But deep down, I knew Margaret didn't see me as family. She saw me as an intruder wearing her last name. Weeks turned into months, and I learned how to survive by staying polite. At charity dinners, I smiled and complimented her guests. I wore the right dresses, said the right things, and even learned how to drink champagne without coughing. Every small approval from her felt like a trophy I didn't want but still chased. Then one day, she came into my room while I was sorting through my mother's jewelry. The pieces weren't expensive, just heirlooms my mom had restored herself. A sapphire necklace, a delicate bracelet engraved with the words "For the moments you'll need strength," and a set of earrings I wore at my wedding. I caught Margaret watching me from the doorway. "Those are beautiful," she said. "They were my mother's," I replied softly. "She left them to me when she passed." She smiled that same slow, cold smile. How sentimental. "But Day, you don't really need such rustic things anymore. The Langford vault has plenty of jewelry more suited for your new life." I laughed nervously. "I like these better." Her eyes lingered on the necklace, then on me. "Of course you do," she said. "Old habits die hard." That was the first time I felt real fear beneath her politeness. Not fear of her, exactly, but of what her kind of power could do if it decided you didn't belong. I told Evan about it that night, and he brushed it off with a gentle kiss. "She just has her ways," he said. "Give her time. She'll come around." But time didn't soften Margaret Langford. It only sharpened her. Every smile was a test. Every compliment was a reminder that she owned the air we breathed under her roof. I started spending more time in my studio, painting just to remember who I was. Sometimes, I'd open my jewelry box and touch the sapphire necklace, feeling its weight in my palm. It reminded me of my mother's voice, steady and kind. One evening, Margaret knocked on the door and handed me an invitation. "The Women's Guild charity auction," she said. "We'd love your help organizing donations." Her eyes flicked toward the vanity where my jewelry box sat today. I didn't think much of it then, but now I wish I had. There was something calculating in that glance, something that made me feel like prey being politely observed. I tried to shake it off, focusing on Evan, on love, on the life we were building. I wanted to believe that I could bridge the gap between her world and mine if I was just patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough. But the truth was, silence in that house wasn't peace. It was surrender. The day I realized that, I was in the garden, pruning Margaret's roses. She walked up beside me, her perfume thick and floral, her tone as smooth as ever. "You have a good heart, Clara," she said. "But sometimes, knowing your place is more important than showing your heart." I didn't respond. I just kept clipping the roses, one by one, watching the petals fall into the dirt. She patted my shoulder lightly. "You'll learn," she said. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the stone path like a clock counting down. That night, I put my mother's bracelet on before bed and whispered to myself, "I won't let her erase me." I didn't know it yet, but she'd soon teach me how easily love could be used as a weapon. Would you have stayed silent if someone tried to erase where you came from? Tell me in the comments. I remember that morning like it was frozen in glass. Every sound, every color, every heartbeat felt too sharp, too real. The kind of morning when nothing looks wrong, but something in your bones whispers that it is. The Langford mansion always looked like a magazine cover. Sunlight spilling across marble floors, lavender wafting in from the garden, the faint hum of an espresso machine in the distance. But that day, it felt like a stage. Polished. Perfect. Too quiet. I was in the guest suite Evan and I shared, packing up for the art gala we were supposed to attend that evening. My mother's sapphire necklace, my last real connection to her, was sitting on the dresser the night before. I remembered polishing it, tracing the tiny scratches she used to call signs of love. Now, it wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe I'd misplaced it. I checked the drawer, my jewelry case, the vanity. Then I went cold. The necklace wasn't the only thing missing. My grandmother's ruby earrings, the gold bangles from my aunt, every heirloom, every piece that belonged to the women who came before me. Gone. My chest felt hollow. I looked around like the air could explain it to me. And then I heard her voice. Clara, dear? You look pale. Margaret stood in the doorway, wrapped in her morning robe, holding her teacup like a queen holding a scepter. Have you seen my jewelry box? I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. She didn't answer right away. She took a sip of her tea, eyes steady, calm. Ah, yes. I noticed those pieces yesterday. Quite traditional, weren't they? Traditional? They were my family's, I said. Yes, she murmured, setting her cup down with perfect precision. Which is exactly why I decided to do something meaningful with them. My heartbeat stopped. What do you mean? She smiled, a small, perfect, terrible smile. You see, darling, the Guild is hosting a charity auction next month. I've donated them in your name. I blinked. You, what? You gave away my mother's jewels. Not gave away, she said softly, as if correcting a child. Donated. For a cause. My hands clenched. Those weren't yours to give. She tilted her head, studying me like she was watching an insect try to fly. Everything under this roof belongs to the family, Clara. You married into that. You'll learn how we do things here. It wasn't just the words. It was how she said them. Sweet, calm, as though she were teaching me etiquette instead of gutting my heart. I felt small, stupid, powerless. I wanted to scream, to tear through every polished surface until I found them. But Evan had left early for meetings. And Margaret was the kind of woman who could twist any outburst into proof that you didn't belong. So I stood there, silent, every nerve screaming, while she picked up her teacup again. She looked pleased. Besides, she added lightly, those old designs didn't suit you. I'll have the family jeweler craft something more refined. Something more Langford. That word, Langford, landed like a slap. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty dresser. The sunlight that poured across it looked cruel, like it was mocking me for ever thinking I was safe here. I remembered my mother's voice. Never forget who you are, Clara. The world will try to take it piece by piece. And I realized it already had. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions. Smiling when the house staff passed, pretending I wasn't breaking inside. I told myself I'd talk to Evan that night. He'd understand. He loved me. But when he got home, I couldn't even get the words out. He looked exhausted, distracted, already dressed for dinner. My mother mentioned the donation, he said casually, like it was nothing. It was generous of her to do that in your name. Evan, she had no right, I whispered. He kissed my forehead like I was being silly. It's just jewelry, Clara. We can buy more. Just jewelry. He didn't get it. He didn't want to. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment since I'd met the Langfords. Every kind word from Margaret that came with a hidden hook. Every compliment that made me feel small. She'd been patient, strategic. First, she praised my art. Then, she offered to help me navigate the social circles I didn't belong to. She made sure I owed her tiny favors that looked kind until you added them up. Now she'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And she'd done it smiling. The next morning, I went to the guild hall to see if I could stop the auction. The staff there smiled politely, telling me how wonderful it was that I'd given up such treasures. The papers were already signed. The items already appraised. Margaret had done it all flawlessly. As I left, one of the women said, "Your mother-in-law is such a vision of grace. We're lucky to have her." I smiled back, even as my stomach turned. When I got home, the mansion was full of florists and caterers. Margaret was planning another event. She saw me and called out, "Clara, dear, you'll love the theme. All proceeds go to empowering young women." Isn't that fitting? I almost laughed. Empowering women. She'd taken every symbol of mine and twisted it into a trophy for her reputation. That night, I walked into her study. She was reviewing a guest list. "I want them back," I said quietly. She didn't even look up. "Excuse me?" "My jewels. My mother's. You're not keeping them in that auction." Finally, she looked at me. Not angry. Not surprised.
just mildly amused.
You really must learn how this world works, Clara.
Appearances matter.
Attach your name to the right things, and people forget where you came from. I stepped closer. I don't want people to forget.
Her smile vanished.
Then you'll never survive here.
The silence that followed was suffocating.
That's when I understood something. Margaret didn't hate me because I was unpolished.
She hated me because I couldn't be bought.
Because every time she looked at me, she saw a woman who refused to erase her own reflection.
But I said nothing.
I turned, walked away, and closed the door behind me. In the hallway, my pulse throbbed in my ears.
I wanted to burn her words out of my head. I wanted to take back everything she'd touched. But I wasn't ready yet.
That night, I took out my sketchbook, the one thing she couldn't control. I drew the necklace, every curve, every gemstone, from memory. My mother's face came alive on the page beside it. And for the first time, the grief hardened into something sharper.
Not anger. Not yet.
Resolve. Because I realized something she didn't. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it waits.
It watches. It learns.
Weeks passed. The auction posters went up across the city. My name appeared beneath the words Donor of Honor. Everyone praised my generosity. Margaret soaked in the attention, the perfect picture of benevolence. At the event, people complimented her endlessly.
She'd turned my loss into her crown.
But I smiled too. I laughed when they thanked me for my kindness.
Because I had learned her game now.
I had seen how she moved her pieces, how she dressed cruelty in kindness. And I promised myself I would learn to play, too.
That day, she took my jewels.
But she also gave me something far more dangerous, a reason. If this happened to you, what would you do first? Confront or wait?
Tell me in the comments. I didn't plan it.
Not at first. At least, that's what I told myself. After the charity auction, everyone kept talking about Margaret's generosity. Every glossy magazine, every high society blog. Margaret Langford's remarkable act of grace.
They made her sound like a saint. And right next to her name, mine.
Donor of Honor, Clara Whitmore Langford.
I'd see the articles pop up every time I opened my phone. The photos. The fake smiles. Her hand resting on my shoulder like she owned me. That's when something inside me snapped. Not the kind that breaks.
The kind that sharpens. Evan didn't notice the change in me. He thought I'd accepted it, moved on. He went to work, came home, kissed my cheek, scrolled through emails, and fell asleep beside me without asking what I was thinking. But I didn't sleep.
Not anymore.
Each night, I sat at the vanity, the same spot where my mother's jewels used to shine, and I listened to the quiet tick of her old silver watch. It was the only thing Margaret hadn't touched, probably because it wasn't flashy enough to show off.
Tick, tick, tick. That sound became my pulse.
My focus.
My countdown. The first thing I did was simple. I started looking.
Margaret had said she donated the jewelry to the guild. That meant there had to be a record, an inventory, an auction list, something public. I waited until she left for her weekly brunch with the guild board, then opened her office door. The scent of roses and expensive perfume hit me like a wall. I moved quietly, careful not to disturb anything. Margaret's desk was a monument to control. Perfectly aligned folders, pens arranged by color, framed photos of her at galas, shaking hands with governors and CEOs.
Her computer was open but locked. I smiled.
Evan had shown me once that all Langford home devices shared the same network password, something pretentious like Lang Legacy 1.
It worked.
Her desktop wallpaper was a portrait of her and Evan from his college graduation. Even the photo looked staged.
I opened her email.
Hundreds of unread messages, social invites, event confirmations, guild correspondence. I typed auction into the search bar. And there it was. An email thread titled Women's Guild Charity Auction, Langford Estate Contributions.
I clicked.
The list was long: paintings, antique furniture, fine china. And then, near the bottom, Lot 47, sapphire necklace, gold bangles, ruby earrings. Donated by Langford Estate.
Not Clara Langford. Not even in her name. The estate.
Margaret had erased me from my own history.
My heart pounded so loud I thought I'd wake the entire house.
I took screenshots of everything, emails, appraisals, photographs.
Every digital trail she thought she'd buried.
Then I forwarded them to a new Gmail account I'd made the night before under a fake name, ellen.mark@outlook.com.
My mother's middle name. Her favorite flower. If Margaret wanted to play charity, I could play invisible. After that, I started digging deeper.
I learned how the guild handled donations. Every item was processed through a third-party auction house, with funds transferred to the guild's charity account. Which meant the jewels had already been sold.
But that was fine. Because I didn't just want them back.
I wanted to make her explain how she got them.
Publicly. For that, I needed proof.
Not just the stolen items, but the system she used to move them. So, I kept watching. Every Thursday, Margaret received a private courier envelope from the guild. I started intercepting the copies meant for Mrs. Evan Langford, which usually ended up in the same household mail tray.
Inside were lists of donors and receipts. I scanned them on my tablet, then slipped them back before anyone noticed. Weeks passed, and my digital folder grew. PDFs, screenshots, bank statements, names of auction buyers.
Every night, that ticking watch beside me reminded me of my mother's voice. Patience, Clara.
Precision wins what anger can't. And with every tick, I grew calmer. Smarter. More deliberate. I'd stopped feeling scared in that house. Now, I was studying it.
I learned that Margaret's guild wasn't just a charity network, it was her power grid. She used donations to buy influence, trading favors disguised as philanthropy.
The jewels weren't about money. They were about control.
I started tracking her contacts, too. I'd see her whispering with guild women at dinners, smiling that perfect, careful smile. I'd take mental notes. Who laughed, who listened, who avoided her eyes. One night, I overheard her on the phone in the garden, her voice sharp and low. Yes, transfer it under the estate name. Don't mention Clara. She's not relevant here. That was the night I decided I would make myself relevant again. I began sending anonymous tips to a local society columnist, links, screenshots, whispers of inconsistency in guild donations. The journalist didn't know it was me, but within days, people started talking. The first article was small, questions surround women's guild financial records. Nothing directly tied to Margaret yet, but it was enough to make her uneasy. I saw it in her eyes at breakfast when she skimmed the paper. Her fingers tightened around a coffee cup. Journalists, she muttered. Always chasing drama. I hid my smile behind my orange juice. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her. She was reacting to me. One evening, Evan mentioned the story. Mom's furious about that article, he said. She thinks someone inside the guild is leaking information. Maybe someone's just asking questions, I said. He shrugged. She'll handle it. That's what he always said. She'll handle it. He never realized how much that sentence exposed. I stayed quiet, letting him believe I was harmless. That was my greatest advantage. In the following weeks, I built a small web of fake profiles, guild volunteers, donors, assistants. Using their names, I emailed the auction house requesting confirmations, records, and payment histories. Half the time, they sent them without checking. People trusted the Langford name too much. Every piece of data I got was another thread in the web. I traced how Margaret shifted money between the guild's charity fund and her personal foundation account. Technically legal. Morally rotten. Each discovery felt like oxygen. The helplessness I'd felt that morning when I saw my empty dresser was gone. Now I had a purpose. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror while working late, the calm expression, the faint smile. I barely recognized myself. The girl who begged for fairness had vanished. In her place stood someone learning how to wield silence like a blade. One night, I printed all the screenshots and laid them across my studio floor, emails, receipts, donation ledgers. A paper battlefield. The watch on my wrist kept ticking. I whispered to the empty room. You took my mother's jewels, Margaret. But you forgot, she raised a fighter. That week, I created one last file, a digital folder named Langford Estate, Confidential. Inside, I compiled everything that could burn her reputation to ashes. Then I scheduled an auto-send to multiple media outlets, timed for the Guild's next gala.
All I needed to do was press one button. But I didn't. Not yet.
Timing mattered more than revenge itself. And waiting wasn't weakness, it was control. The night before the gala, I sat in my art studio surrounded by unfinished canvases. Paint tubes, brushes, scattered memories. My mother's watch sat on the table beside me, still ticking. For the first time, I noticed how steady the sound had become.
Not nervous.
Not rushed.
Just certain.
I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and smiled.
Margaret had taught me what power looked like. Now, she'd see what it felt like when it slipped through her fingers.
For the first time, I didn't feel small in that house. I felt inevitable.
Hit like if you believe karma has a perfect memory. I learned to wear kindness like armor.
Every morning I dressed in the image Margaret liked. Soft colors, simple jewelry, that quiet smile that said I belonged. I practiced it in the mirror until it felt like my face again. I answered the same questions at luncheons, nodded at the right times, and laughed where everyone else laughed. People began to call me gracious and composed.
It was a useful lie. Behind the smile, I was working.
Margaret loved to host. She choreographed dinners like a director, who sat where, who toasted whom, which causes to mention.
She loved how the world applauded her generosity.
At every event she moved through the room like a current. People floated with her. I watched her collect praise the way some people collect stamps. She would lean toward a guest, lower her voice, and say, "We must help these girls.
It's important to give back." The guests would nod and clink their glasses. Cameras would flash.
Articles would call her a pillar of philanthropy.
Her hands never looked dirty.
I played the part she expected. I volunteered for committees, I signed donation forms she suggested, I smiled for photos with children at fundraising breakfasts. I even gave interviews when asked, talking about empowerment and opportunity. The words tasted strange when they left my mouth, but I said them all the same because each one bought me time.
Time to undo what she had done. I used the internet like a map.
I learned where the auctioneer listed items, how buyers paid, and how the guild's funds flowed. Where she saw charity, I saw records, digital footprints that didn't lie. When a buyer posted a photo of a rare vintage necklace on social media, I saved it. When an auction house wrote a summary of last year's top sales, I downloaded the PDF. When a collector bragged about a Langford find, I sent a private message asking where they'd bought it. People are careless when they think they own something important.
Sometimes I messaged as myself. Sometimes I used the fake accounts I'd built. Often I was just a concerned admirer asking about provenance.
More often than not, the buyer answered, proud, revealing the receipt or photo. I methodically rebuilt my jewelry's path from Margaret's hands to strangers' necks. Each reclaim felt like a small victory hidden in plain sight. I arranged discreet returns, paid quietly to buy back items that now belonged to people who had no idea they were wearing someone else's memory. I met a woman in a coffee shop and watched her hand me my mother's bracelet, tears mixing with embarrassment as she realized what she'd been shown off as a vintage find. I held the bracelet and felt my mother's ghost warm and familiar for a second.
I never shouted. I never embarrassed anyone in public.
I told the buyers the truth with a soft voice, showed a photo, or explained the engraving, and most were mortified. They returned the items without drama because they were decent people who had been sold a lie. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself one careful transaction at a time. I felt the weight of each jewel in my palm and the lighter weight of Margaret's illusions.
Every small recovery was a stitch in a larger plan.
Revenge, I decided, didn't need to be loud to be lethal. Meanwhile, at home, Margaret soaked up the praise like hot sunlight. She would hold court in the drawing room and speak of community and legacy.
People leaned in. They felt safe with her because she smelled of perfume and control.
Evan smiled when his mother was praised. He'd grown up on that praise. It sounded like home to him. Sometimes, when she was charming a room, I would catch Evan watching her with an almost boyish reverence. He loved her for the world she gave him. I loved him for the man he was when he wasn't under her spell.
But he never saw the maps I drew at night. He never saw the emails I collected.
He never noticed that I would slip out after brunches to the auction house, read inventory lists under fluorescent lights, and copy the descriptions into my phone. To him, I was the quiet wife who smiled and kept a steady hand.
That was both my shield and my sorrow.
There were small, guilty moments, when a recovered earring lay on my palm and I had to go to dinner and wear a borrowed smile.
I wondered if I should tell him.
He would look at me and say, "I wish you'd say when something's wrong." I wanted to say it so badly, wanted to tell him the truth about how his mother polished herself on other people's losses, but I didn't. Because the plan needed patience, and because once you open your mouth, people hear your fear. The more I reclaimed, the more certain I became that Margaret's donations had been a performance. She was curating a narrative where she was generous and I was grateful. If I shoved the truth into the room, she would twist it into drama about an ungrateful daughter-in-law, and the room would side with the comfortable story. Quiet, careful fixes would not make a spectacle. They would, however, chip away at her foundation. One evening, I received a message from a woman named Nancy, someone who'd bought what she thought was a vintage Langford piece.
Nancy's photos matched my mother's sapphire precisely. She wanted to meet and return it.
We agreed to meet in a small antique shop downtown. When she handed me the necklace, her fingers trembled.
"I followed the listing," she said.
"They said Langford Estate, and I thought it would be rare. I never imagined." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "You did the right thing by returning it," I said. "You'll never know what that means to me." She smiled, embarrassed and relieved. She left with a quiet apology, unaware she'd been part of something far more complicated than a simple purchase.
I wrapped the necklace in tissue paper the way my mother would have.
I breathed in the scent of old gold and storage and felt both sorrow and triumph. The jewels came back to me like letters written by someone who loves you, messy, imperfect, and full of meaning. I started keeping a small wooden box on my studio shelf. I put each piece in it as I recovered it. The box started to feel heavier in the days that mattered most. It became my ledger, my secret proof that things could be set right. Even as I worked in shadows, Margaret ramped up her public life. She announced a new initiative, Langford Legacy Grants for young women starting businesses. Photos of her at ribbon-cutting ceremonies filled the paper. I watched her smile into cameras and wondered how easily a narrative could be built on the bones of someone else's life. One night, she invited several guild members to the house for a small reception. I flowed through the room on autopilot, cheerful, helpful, polished. Margaret floated too, radiant and convincing. She toasted the guild's success and held up a champagne flute like a conductor lifting a baton.
People clapped. Cameras clicked. She was a star.
I stood to the side, near the window, and felt the cool night air on my face. For a second, I let myself imagine stepping forward, telling every truth I'd collected, watching her crown crumble. The thought felt intoxicating. But then I thought of the practicalities, the way she would spin it, the way our lives would become endless gossip. I thought of Evan, of the quiet man who loved his mother's laugh. I thought of my mother's voice telling me to be precise, not loud.
So I stayed quiet.
As the room erupted in applause, I caught sight of a woman across the room wearing a long black dress. She raised her glass and looked directly at Margaret. For the first time in public, Margaret's practiced composure flickered. She smiled thinly and met the woman's gaze like a challenge. That small crack felt like wind under stone. When the evening wound down, guests filed out, praising Margaret's vision. She hugged each one, accepting their gratitude as if it were currency. Evan walked me to the car, kissed my temple, and said, "You were wonderful tonight. I'm proud of you."
He meant it. I believed him in that moment.
I wanted to believe in us. I went home and placed the sapphire necklace on the dresser.
It gleamed softly in the lamplight.
I touched the metal and felt a ripple of relief that was almost physical. For a moment I imagined wearing it to the next gala, letting it sit heavy against my throat to remind me of what I had taken back.
But there was more to take.
The box was still half full.
I knew I wasn't finished.
There were more pieces in other hands, more lies wrapped in boughs and ribboned with philanthropy. The work was slow, quiet, and sometimes lonely. Each recovered item was a victory that only I understood. I also knew this: Margaret would keep hosting galas. She would keep toasting to charity.
She would keep the cameras close and the truth at arm's length.
She would never suspect the small, steady theft of her image that I was about to orchestrate. By the time she toasted to her charity, I already had my mother's necklace back. Would you stay quiet while getting your revenge, or would you make noise?
I didn't sleep the night before I called her.
The chairwoman of the Women's Guild, Frances Eaton, wasn't someone you just called.
She was the kind of woman who sent people to make calls for her.
But I had spent weeks watching Margaret polish her public image like a trophy, and I knew the only way to hit her where it hurt was to go higher than her. Frances Eaton was higher. When I finally picked up the phone, my hand shook so much I had to press it against the desk to steady it. Her assistant answered first, crisp voice, perfect diction. Mrs. Eaton's office.
May I ask who's calling?
I told her my name, careful to sound calm. I could almost hear the typing on the other end, the check, the pause.
Then, Mrs. Eaton can give you 15 minutes this afternoon.
Be punctual.
Click. That was my first small victory.
Margaret had once bragged that Frances Eaton never took calls from new money or nervous wives. But here I was, a nervous wife with an appointment. At exactly 3 p.m., I walked into the Eaton Foundation offices, white walls, glass doors, soft carpets that swallowed the sound of your shoes. Everything smelled faintly of citrus and power. The receptionist looked up, recognized my name, and gave me the kind of smile reserved for people who might matter. Frances's office was on the top floor. The door opened before I even knocked. She was sitting behind her desk, tall and calm, her gray hair slicked into a chignon so tight it looked like a warning. She gestured for me to sit, no small talk, just expectation.
I hear you have something important to show me, she said. I nodded, slid the folder across the desk.
Inside were copies of emails, auction listings, donation receipts, all the breadcrumbs Margaret had left behind. Each page was labeled, highlighted, traced back to her charity. It was a paper trail of good deeds gone rotten.
Frances didn't speak for a long time.
She read, flipped a page, read again. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioner.
Finally, she set the folder down and leaned back in her chair.
Where did you get all this? From public records, I said. And from people who were willing to talk once they realized what they'd been part of. She looked at me, searching for something, fear, maybe, or vengeance. And what do you want me to do with it? I want you to see her for what she is, I said. The guild's funds, the auctions, the donations, they are all covers. She's been selling private jewelry as charity items.
My jewelry.
My mother's.
The words came out steadier than I felt. My throat was dry. I could hear my pulse in my ears.
Frances pressed her fingers together. And your husband? He doesn't know, I admitted.
He wouldn't believe me. Not yet.
Frances nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. I don't tolerate corruption under my watch, she said finally.
But if I act on this, it will go public.
You understand what that means, for her, for you, for your family. I understand.
That was a lie.
I didn't.
Not really.
I only knew that I couldn't keep watching Margaret play saint while wearing the spoils of her theft. Frances turned back, studying me. This kind of exposure, it doesn't end quietly. Once it starts, everyone gets touched by it. I met her eyes. Then I guess we'll both have to be careful. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. Careful is the right word, Mrs. Langford. We'll handle this discreetly, for now. When I left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control.
The kind that doesn't shout.
The kind that sits in your bones and whispers, you're not powerless anymore. That night, Margaret was in the living room, laughing on the phone, planning another guild benefit. She looked radiant in her silk robe, glass of wine in hand, completely unaware that her world was shifting beneath her. I watched her from the hallway for a moment, my chest tight with something sharp, satisfaction, maybe, or guilt. Evan was upstairs, half asleep, unaware of the war being waged in whispers beneath his roof. When I crawled into bed beside him, he stirred, murmured, "You're up late again. You working on something?"
I kissed his shoulder.
"Just tying up a few things."
He smiled without opening his eyes. "You never stop." If he only knew. The next few days passed in slow motion.
Frances sent updates through her assistant, subtle messages that sounded like ordinary social exchanges. Mrs. Eaton is reviewing your proposal, meant she was gathering corroboration. The committee will discuss logistics soon, meant the guild's board was quietly digging into Margaret's records. Margaret, meanwhile, was busier than ever. She'd been chosen as the keynote speaker for the annual charity ball. "It's an honor," she told me one evening, her voice dripping satisfaction. "Frances finally recognizes all I've done."
I nearly laughed. Frances recognizes it, all right. Each day, my sense of control grew. The scales were tilting, and for once, I wasn't on the losing end. But control comes with its own weight.
Every time Margaret complimented me, every time Evan looked at me with love in his eyes, the guilt twisted deeper. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Margaret came up behind me and said, "You've really come into your own lately, Clara."
Calm, confident.
"I like it." Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes were sharp. "You've been spending more time in town, haven't you?"
My pulse jumped.
"Errands, mostly. The guild's planning sessions."
She smiled slowly. "I'm glad you're finally getting involved."
Frances appreciates loyal women. The way she said it, like a test, made the room feel smaller.
I forced a smile.
"We all want the guild to thrive."
"Good."
She reached out and smoothed an invisible wrinkle on my sleeve. "I've worked hard for our family's reputation, Clara. I'd hate to see anyone misunderstand my intentions." For a second, I thought she knew. My stomach dropped. Then she turned away, humming, completely at ease.
That night, I couldn't eat.
Evan noticed.
"You okay?" he asked.
"Just tired," I said. "Too many guild meetings."
He laughed. "Now you sound like my mother." It was meant as a joke.
It didn't feel like one. Days ticked down toward the charity ball. Frances confirmed she would handle the reveal. The guild's internal auditors had verified everything.
The donations had been rerouted. The auctions were fraudulent.
Margaret's empire of good deeds was a house of cards. Still, as the date approached, my nerves began to buzz like a live wire. I'd wanted this, but now that it was coming, I couldn't shake the fear of what came after.
Margaret wouldn't go quietly.
And Evan, he would see me differently after this. 2 nights before the ball, Frances called again. "The committee has agreed.
We'll present the findings formally. It will happen during the donor acknowledgements.
Margaret will be there." "She wouldn't miss it," I said. "Then neither should you."
Her tone was final.
The morning of the ball, the house was chaos. Margaret floated through the kitchen directing caterers and stylists like a general commanding troops.
She wore a gold silk gown that shimmered when she moved. Her makeup was perfect.
She looked like a woman untouchable by consequence. "Evan, remember to smile for the press," she said, fastening her earrings. "We need strong family photos tonight." Evan laughed, already in his tuxedo. "You act like we're royalty."
Margaret smiled.
"Reputation, dear. It's everything." Her words landed like prophecy. I dressed quietly, choosing a simple black gown. No jewelry, not even the reclaimed pieces. I didn't need decoration tonight. I was bringing truth. At the venue, cameras flashed as guests arrived. The ballroom gleamed with gold accents and soft jazz. Waiters glided between tables carrying champagne flutes. It was the kind of evening that looked perfect until you remembered perfection is usually staged.
Margaret owned the room.
Everywhere she went, hands reached out, voices greeted her. I watched her accept compliments like oxygen, her smile never cracking. Evan stayed close, unaware he was walking through the final act of a play neither of us could stop. When the speeches began, Frances took the stage. Her tone was measured, her posture calm. She started with praise, years of service, dedication, philanthropy. Margaret's name floated in the air like a crown. She smiled, soaking it in. Then Frances's voice shifted. "But with great trust comes great responsibility," she said. "And sometimes, what we believe to be generosity hides something else entirely." The room stilled. You could hear the clinking of a single glass being set down. Frances continued, her words surgical, unveiling numbers, discrepancies, transfers. Margaret's face froze in confusion, then disbelief, then something like fear. Evan looked at her, puzzled. Mom.
Margaret's smile wavered. There must be some mistake. Frances opened the folder I'd given her. The documents speak for themselves.
The Guild takes these matters seriously. Cameras flashed again, but now they weren't admiration, they were blood in the water. Margaret stood abruptly, face pale. I've given everything to this organization.
Frances met her gaze.
That's precisely what we're investigating. I sat perfectly still, heart pounding, the air thick with shock. Margaret's empire, her spotless image, was cracking in real time. Evan's eyes darted between us, confused, hurt. Clara, what's going on?
I couldn't answer. Not yet.
When the meeting adjourned in chaos, Margaret pushed past me without a word. Frances caught my eye across the room. A small nod, victory sealed. I should have felt relief.
Instead, I felt the weight of it all pressing down.
Guilt, adrenaline, fear, all of it tangled together. I'd wanted her to fall, but watching it happen felt like watching a car crash you couldn't stop. As we left the ballroom, cameras still flashing, Evan grabbed my arm.
Tell me you didn't know about this, he said quietly. His voice cracked.
I opened my mouth, but nothing came out.
Margaret's voice echoed behind us, trembling but defiant.
You'll regret this,
Clara. You don't know who you're playing with.
I turned to face her, my pulse steady now, voice calm. I know exactly who I'm playing with. She stared at me, eyes full of fury, realization dawning. And as the reporters swarmed closer, Frances stepped forward to give a statement. The cameras turned toward her, lights flashing like judgment. Margaret's empire had been built on reputation. I was about to shake its foundation. If you're still watching, drop a heart. Things are just getting started. The night smelled like money and nerves. Gold lights poured down from crystal chandeliers, washing everything in that too-perfect shimmer that hides the cracks underneath. The Langfords' annual charity gala, Margaret's crown jewel event, was the kind of night where no one sweated, no one stumbled, and no one told the truth.
The ballroom looked like a movie set.
Every table glowed under soft white candles. Diamond bracelets caught the light like tiny spotlights on trembling wrists. Waiters glided like ghosts in black uniforms, carrying trays of champagne and practiced smiles. The air buzzed with chatter, compliments, and secrets wrapped in designer labels. And in the middle of it all stood Margaret Langford, my mother-in-law, the queen of reputation. The woman who once told me, money doesn't change people, it only exposes them.
She had no idea how right she'd been.
I'd watched her prepare for this night for weeks. Every detail had a signature precision. The seating chart, the floral arrangements, even the playlist, which alternated between classical strings and subtle jazz. Her gown was silver, fitted, heavy with hand-sewn crystals that glittered like armor. Her hair was flawless, her smile rehearsed, her confidence unshakable. Or at least, it used to be. Because tonight, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, that confidence had begun to tremble. I could see it in the tiny tick at the corner of her mouth, the way her fingers clenched the stem of her champagne glass a second too long.
She'd heard whispers, I knew that much.
Frances Eaton wasn't careless. The guild chairwoman knew how to let rumors ripple just enough to unsettle the guilty before the curtain rose. I stood across the room near the silent auction table, pretending to study an art piece I couldn't afford. My dress was simple, black satin, no jewelry except my mother's old watch.
I wore it like armor.
Every tick of its hand reminded me why I was there. Guests mingled around me, unaware they were walking through the middle of a reckoning. I heard bits of conversation float through the air. The guild raised a record this year. Margaret outdid herself again. She's practically a saint.
If they only knew.
Evan joined me by the table, his tux perfect, his smile genuine. You okay? He asked, brushing his hand against mine.
I nodded.
Just soaking it all in.
He chuckled.
You hate these things. I do, I said softly, but tonight feels different.
He didn't notice the edge in my voice.
He never did when it came to his mother. Margaret called for everyone's attention. Her voice, as always, carried across the room like a song. Friends, family, and esteemed members of the guild, Thank you for being here tonight. We gather not just to celebrate generosity, but to share it.
Applause rose like a wave. Cameras flashed.
Margaret basked in it, her expression glowing with the satisfaction of control. Frances Eaton stood off to the side, calm, collected, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked every bit the dignified judge, and in a way, she was. Margaret continued, "This year, we've accomplished something truly extraordinary. Our charity initiatives have reached record-breaking numbers. And with that success, I am proud to say the Guild is entering a new era, one defined by transparency, trust, and purpose."
High irony would have been funny if it weren't so disgusting.
When she finished, she turned gracefully toward Frances. "Of course, none of this would be possible without the leadership of our chairwoman, Mrs. Eaton. Frances, would you honor us with a few words?"
That was the cue. Frances stepped forward.
The applause softened, and the room fell into that quiet expectation that only happens before impact. She smiled, gracious, controlled.
"Thank you, Margaret.
And thank you to everyone who continues to support the Women's Guild. Tonight, we celebrate generosity, but also accountability."
The word hit like a small thunderclap.
Frances's tone didn't change.
Her calm was unnerving.
"In our mission for transparency, we conducted a thorough audit of all Guild assets and contributions. And during that process, we discovered something unexpected."
The room hushed completely. Margaret's smile faltered.
Frances continued, "Several donations, high-value jewelry pieces, specifically, were traced back to private estates. One of them, the Langford family estate, appears to have listed items without the rightful owner's consent."
Whispers rippled like an aftershock. Heads turned. Cameras tilted.
Margaret laughed lightly, though her eyes betrayed panic. "I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding," she said, voice brittle. "All items were donated with full transparency." Frances opened the folder on the podium. The sound of paper turning echoed like a verdict. "According to our records," she said, "these items were appraised and sold under the title Langford Charity Collection. The proceeds were filtered through multiple sub-accounts, none of which matched the Guild's charitable fund."
Gasps.
Evan turned to his mother, stunned. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Margaret's color drained.
I don't know."
"This is ridiculous."
But her voice cracked on the last word.
Frances closed the folder. "We have documentation. The Guild takes this matter seriously. An internal review will begin immediately."
Margaret tried to recover, raising her chin.
"Frances, surely we can discuss this privately."
But Frances didn't give her the chance. "No, Margaret.
The Guild belongs to the women who trust it. Transparency means honesty, even when it's uncomfortable."
Silence.
Margaret's hand trembled, her champagne glass slipping slightly before she caught it. I watched her swallow hard, blinking back the panic rising behind her perfect poise. This was it. The empire of appearances collapsing in real time. Evan's gaze darted between his mother and Frances. "There has to be an explanation," he said, his voice small, desperate. "Mom wouldn't." Margaret turned to him, eyes wide, pleading. "Evan, believe me, this is an attack. Someone's trying to ruin me."
And then her gaze found me.
For a second, she froze. Just a second, but I saw it. Recognition. Realization.
Her breath caught. I didn't look away.
The noise of the ballroom faded.
The crowd became background.
All that existed was the line between us, her disbelief and my calm. Margaret took a slow step toward me, eyes burning.
"You," she whispered.
Her voice was barely audible, but I heard it like a siren.
I didn't respond. I didn't need to.
Everything had already been said. Frances cleared her throat, reclaiming the room. "To maintain the integrity of this organization, we will suspend all Langford-related fundraising activity until the matter is resolved."
"Thank you."
Applause didn't come this time.
Just murmurs. The sound of power shifting.
Margaret turned back toward the stage, her control gone, her smile cracking into something raw and frightened.
"You can't do this to me," she said, her voice breaking. Frances met her eyes.
"I'm afraid the evidence says otherwise." Margaret stood frozen, her world dissolving around her. Reporters began scribbling, phones appeared, and the whispers grew louder. "Did you hear?"
I knew something was off.
"She's finished." I watched her chest rise and fall, her breathing sharp, erratic. Evan moved toward her, unsure, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away. "I have nothing to hide," she said loudly, her voice trembling. "Nothing."
But the room didn't believe her. Neither did she. I could have smiled then. I could have enjoyed it. But I didn't.
Watching her unravel didn't feel like triumph. It felt like justice wearing grief's clothing. Because beneath everything she'd done, there was still the memory of all the nights I'd tried to earn her approval, the woman I'd called family, the woman who had once smiled at me across a dinner table as she quietly destroyed what little I had left.
Now she stood exposed under the lights she'd once commanded.
I turned slightly, catching her reflection in the ballroom mirror.
She didn't look like power anymore.
She looked small, human, breakable. For a heartbeat, I thought about walking over, saying something, anything, but I didn't. Some silences are more powerful than words. When she looked at me across that ballroom, she saw something she'd never expected: mercy.
Because that's what she never understood about people like me. We don't destroy for sport. We destroy to rebuild.
If you've ever seen poetic justice unfold in silence, hit subscribe. We're not done yet. The morning after the gala, the house was too quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow.
Like sound itself was avoiding the walls.
Margaret's silver gown still hung over the back of the living room sofa, crumpled, lifeless. The hem was stained with spilled champagne and something darker: humiliation. I stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching sunlight stretch across the marble floor and touch the fabric like it was daring to wake a ghost.
Last night kept replaying in my mind. The cameras. The gasps. The moment her voice cracked when Frances read her name out loud. I thought it would feel glorious, watching her finally face what she'd done.
But in the cold light of morning, victory had a strange taste. Bittersweet.
Heavy.
Evan came down the stairs, hair a mess, tie still dangling from his collar.
His eyes looked like he hadn't slept.
"You're up early," I said softly. He nodded, silent for a moment, then exhaled hard. "What the hell happened last night, Clara?"
I sipped my coffee. "You saw what happened."
"I saw my mother being humiliated in front of half the city," he snapped. "I saw Frances Eaton tear her apart without warning.
But I still don't understand why."
I looked at him. He wasn't angry, just lost.
Like someone had stolen the ground under his feet.
"Maybe," I said quietly, "you didn't really know her as well as you thought."
His brow furrowed.
"She made mistakes, sure, but fraud?
Theft?
That's insane." "Is it?"
I asked.
"Do you really think all her charity came from generosity? Or was it about control, about how it made her look?"
He rubbed his forehead.
"She's my mother, Clara. I can't just believe she's capable of being cruel." I finished. I couldn't either, not at first.
He went silent. I let the words hang there.
The ticking of my mother's old watch filled the space between us. "Finally," he said, "you sound like you knew this was coming."
I met his eyes.
"Maybe I did."
He froze. His voice dropped.
"What did you do?"
I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was enough.
He stared at me for a long time, then turned away.
"I need to talk to her." "She's not in her room," I said. "She left before dawn. Took her car." His jaw tightened. "Where?"
"Probably somewhere she can control the story before it controls her."
He didn't respond. Just grabbed his jacket and left.
The front door closed with a soft click, and I was alone again. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the stillness. The house that used to feel like hers now felt empty.
Not peaceful. Just waiting.
By noon, the world had already started feeding on the story. The first headline appeared online: "Guild Chairwoman Exposes Charity Fraud, Langford Family Under Fire." Then came another, high society scandal: the Langford legacy in question. And then another, charity queen or con artist.
My phone buzzed nonstop.
Some texts from friends, people pretending to be concerned. Others from strangers who'd followed the Langfords' gilded life like a soap opera. They wanted gossip, not truth.
I didn't answer any of them. Margaret's world was collapsing in real time. Her sponsors cut ties.
The guild suspended her indefinitely. Every socialite who used to orbit her disappeared overnight, afraid of catching the fallout.
By evening, even the staff moved differently around the house. Quieter. Cautious.
The name Mrs. Langford wasn't said with reverence anymore, it was whispered like a warning. And for the first time since I'd married into this family, no one looked at me like I didn't belong. That was the strange part, the power shift.
It wasn't loud or theatrical.
It was silent, invisible, like air rearranging itself. The housekeeper asked me what to do about the dinner delivery.
The driver asked me if I wanted the car brought around.
The gardener greeted me first.
Margaret had always been the center. Now she was a shadow no one wanted to touch.
Later that week, I saw her again. She was in the conservatory, sitting alone among her orchids, her phone dark beside her. Her makeup was gone, her hair loose, her posture small. When she looked up and saw me, there was no rage, no fire, just exhaustion.
"I suppose you're happy now," she said quietly.
I stepped closer, careful.
"I didn't do this to destroy you, Margaret.
I did it to stop you."
"From what?" she asked bitterly.
"From being proud. From protecting my family. From pretending that taking from others was generosity."
She laughed, a short, dry sound. "You think this changes anything?"
"The city forgets scandals faster than it forgives them. I'll rebuild."
I met her eyes.
"Then rebuild. But this time, start with the truth." Her jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought she might lunge across the room. But then she looked away, her gaze falling on the wilted orchids beside her. "Do you know why I took those jewels?" she asked suddenly.
I didn't answer. "I wanted to see if you'd fight for something," she said. "You were always so quiet. So polite."
"I thought maybe, if I pushed hard enough, you'd finally show me you had teeth." The words hit me like cold water. I studied her face, searching for irony, but there was none.
She actually believed that.
"So this was a test?"
I asked, incredulous.
"In a way," she said softly. "I didn't expect you to win it." Her voice trembled at the end, and for the first time, I saw not the villain, but the woman beneath the mask.
Proud. Afraid. Alone. I turned to leave.
"Maybe next time, don't test people by breaking them."
Her voice followed me.
"And what will you do now, Clara? Without an enemy, what's left?"
I didn't answer. But the question lingered. Days passed. Then a week. The story refused to die.
It spread, mutated, grew teeth. Reporters camped outside the gate. The Langford name was everywhere, for all the wrong reasons. Evan barely spoke to either of us.
He went from disbelief to anger to silence. I didn't blame him.
Loving someone means seeing the best in them, even when it's blinding. One night, he came home late. I was in the study, going through sketches for a new art show, my first in years. The silence between us was heavy but calm. He leaned against the door frame. "I talked to Mum today," he said quietly. I set my pencil down. "How is she?"
"Defensive," he said. "But she knows it's over.
The guild's frozen her accounts. She's selling her shares in the foundation."
I nodded.
"She'll survive."
He hesitated.
"You really did all this, didn't you? You set it in motion."
I met his eyes.
"Would you have believed me if I'd told you the truth from the start?"
He didn't answer.
After a long silence, he said, "You're not the same woman I married." "Maybe I finally stopped pretending," I said. He nodded slowly, then left without another word. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the windows. The house felt alive in a strange way, like it was shedding its old skin, breathing again after years of suffocation. But even in victory, I couldn't shake the weight pressing on my chest. Because for all her cruelty, Margaret was right about one thing. When the fight ends, you have to live with what's left of yourself.
And I wasn't sure who that was anymore.
A few mornings later, I walked into the kitchen and found a small stack of mail on the counter. Bills, charity withdrawal notices, and at the bottom, a box.
No return address. Just my name.
It was wrapped in plain brown paper, the kind used for packages from antique shops or estate sales.
My hands hesitated before touching it.
The weight was wrong, too light for jewelry, too heavy for letters. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, leaving it unopened. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I ran my fingers over the tape, feeling the edges, the faint scent of perfume clinging to the paper.
Margaret's perfume.
My heart slowed, then quickened. She was gone, out of town, staying with an old friend in Connecticut.
So how had this box gotten here? The handwriting on the label was hers. Perfect cursive. Controlled.
Inside, something shifted when I tilted it, something that made a soft, deliberate sound, like metal brushing against silk. I carried it to the dining table, sat down, and stared at it for a full minute. Then I whispered to no one, "What are you doing, Margaret?" I pulled the tape slowly, one strip at a time. The box opened with a faint creak. And when I saw what was inside, the air caught in my throat. I thought it was over, until the box arrived.
What do you think is inside that box? Comment your guess below. When I opened the box, my hands stopped moving.
I didn't breathe for a few seconds. Inside wasn't what I expected. Not gold, not diamonds, not my mother's necklace.
It was empty.
But it wasn't just empty, it was clean. The velvet lining had been replaced, deep blue instead of the faded red I remembered. The hinges were polished until they gleamed like new. The box looked like something restored, reborn, almost sacred. And right there in the corner, pressed into the velvet, was a tiny folded note.
No envelope. No name.
Just my initials, C.W., written in her perfect cursive. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. My hands shook a little, though I wasn't sure if it was anger, confusion, or something else. The paper was smooth, scented faintly with lavender.
Margaret's scent. I unfolded it. 3 words stared back at me.
It's back where it belongs.
That was it. No apology. No signature. No explanation. Just a sentence that said everything and nothing all at once.
For a moment, I felt this strange rush, not triumph, not relief, but something quieter.
Something I couldn't name yet. I set the note down and looked at the box again.
She'd sent it back empty, but in its emptiness, it said more than if it had been full. She wanted me to know she'd let go of the jewels, the control, the pride. She'd given me silence instead of excuses. And somehow, that silence felt louder than any apology could have. I closed the lid gently, my reflection flickering across the polished wood. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. It felt steady. The rest of the day moved slowly, like the house was exhaling after holding its breath for too long.
The reporters had stopped calling.
The guild had issued their final statement, suspension pending investigation, indefinite. Margaret was no longer on any committee, no longer hosting luncheons or charity teas. And Evan, though still distant, had softened. The anger had burned out, replaced by something like quiet understanding. He came home earlier now, made dinner some nights, even asked how my art projects were going. But the silence between us still carried weight. Not hostility, just history. That evening, I carried the jewelry box up to my mother's old armoire, the one piece of furniture I'd fought to keep when I married into this family. I placed it right where her photograph stood, a black and white image of her smiling in front of her store, holding a bouquet of fresh roses. She'd loved jewelry, not for its worth but for what it represented. Effort, beauty, craft. Every piece had a story. Every story had a heartbeat. And when Margaret took those jewels, it felt like she'd taken my mother's heartbeat, too. I ran my fingers over the photo frame and whispered, "It's back, Mom." In a way. The truth was, the necklace had already been returned. I'd gotten it weeks ago, hidden inside a package sent through a shipping broker with no return address. I hadn't told anyone, not even Evan. But this box, this was different. This wasn't about possession anymore. It was about acknowledgement. Margaret hadn't said sorry, but she'd seen me. Finally. The next afternoon, I saw her again. Not by design, just coincidence. It was at the Langford Foundation offices downtown. I'd gone to sign some paperwork for an art exhibit they'd once sponsored. I didn't expect her to be there, The place had been stripped of her presence since the scandal. But there she was, in the lobby, standing near the elevator, wearing a grey coat and no makeup. Her hair was shorter, softer around her face. When she saw me, her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Neither did I. We just looked at each other for a long second. There was no tension, no venom, no armor. Just two women standing in the wreckage of everything they'd fought over, both realizing the fight was done. She gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and I nodded back. Then the elevator doors opened, and she stepped in. That was it. No apology. No confrontation. Just peace, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to prove. I walked out into the cold, the wind biting at my cheeks. The city felt alive again, not hostile, not judgmental. Just alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in it. That night, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and watched the sky fade from gold to indigo. Fireflies blinked over the lawn. The air smelled like wet grass and old wood. Evan came out quietly and sat beside me. "You've been quiet," he said after a while. "Feels good," I said. He smiled faintly. "I saw Mom today." I looked at him. "She told me she sent you something." I nodded. "She did." "She didn't tell me what it was." "Just a box," I said. "Empty." He frowned. "That sounds like her." "Yeah," I said softly. "But I think it was her way of saying she's done fighting." He was quiet for a while, then said, "I think she's scared. For the first time in her life." "She should be," I said. "Losing power does that." He turned to me. "And you? You don't seem angry anymore." I was, I admitted. For a long time. But I realized something. "What?" "That peace isn't about winning. It's about choosing when to stop." He nodded slowly, like he understood, even if it hurt him to. We sat in silence again, watching the lights from the neighbor's house flicker through the trees. Later, when he went inside, I stayed out a little longer. The night air felt different now, lighter somehow. I thought about my mother. About the necklace. About all the years I'd spent trying to be what everyone else needed me to be. I thought revenge would fill the hole Margaret left in me. That seeing her fall would fix everything she'd broken. But all it did was give me an ending, not healing. Healing was quieter. It came in the form of an empty box. A gesture without words. A peace offering wrapped in silence. When I finally went inside, I passed the hallway mirror and caught my reflection. I didn't look like the same woman anymore. My eyes weren't sharp with resentment. They were steady, calm. And behind me, in the reflection, I could see my mother's photograph on the armoire, her smile soft, proud, forgiving. I whispered, "You'd tell me to let it go, wouldn't you?" And for the first time, I truly meant it when I said, "I'm trying." Days turned into weeks. The scandal slowly faded from the headlines. People moved on, the way they always do. But for me, something had changed permanently. I started teaching again, local art classes, small groups of women who'd lost their confidence somewhere between work, marriage, and motherhood. They reminded me of myself, years ago. And sometimes, during those quiet moments in class, when I watched someone's eyes light up as they created something beautiful with their own hands, I thought of my mother again. How she'd believed in creation over competition. How she'd once told me, "The prettiest things in life are the ones you don't have to show off." That stuck with me. Margaret had spent her life showing off. I'd spent mine trying to prove myself. But now, I didn't need to. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the paper, thick, expensive stationery. Inside was a single line. "You were right about peace." No name. No signature. But I didn't need one. I smiled, folded the paper, and slipped it into the jewelry box beside the note she'd sent before. 2 notes. 1 empty box. It wasn't forgiveness written down. It was forgiveness understood. And as I closed the lid one last time, I felt the faintest flicker of something warm inside me, not joy exactly, but grace. Because that's when I realized she finally understood what she'd taken. If this story touched you, tap the like button. It helps others find it too.
Justice doesn't always come with noise.
That's something I didn't understand for a long time. I used to think justice had to look like something: a courtroom, a confession, a crowd watching as the guilty were dragged into the light.
I thought it had to be loud enough to drown out everything I'd lost. But that's not how life works.
Sometimes, justice slips in quietly. It doesn't knock.
It doesn't announce itself.
It just arrives, steady and sure, after the shouting stops. It's been months since the gala, the night everything unraveled and rewove itself in a single heartbeat.
Margaret Langford's name used to open doors. Now, it makes people whisper.
Not cruelly, not mockingly, just softly, the way you speak about a fallen queen whose crown finally got too heavy.
And me? I walk through the same city that once made me feel invisible, and people see me now. Not because of the headlines.
Not because I got revenge. But because I stopped trying to prove I belonged. That's the real illusion, belonging.
The Langfords taught me that.
The higher the pedestal, the lonelier the view. When the truth came out, I expected to feel fireworks inside me, some kind of victory high.
But all I felt was stillness.
And maybe that's what true justice is: the end of noise.
Margaret doesn't call. She doesn't visit.
But every so often, I hear about her, how she's keeping to herself, how she's focusing on family, how she's become quieter.
That last one always makes me smile.
Because silence used to be my prison. Now, it's her teacher.
Evan and I are different now.
Not broken, but rebuilt. Like something that's been taken apart and reassembled with stronger hands. We talk more, not about the past, but about the kind of people we want to be. He told me once, during one of our late-night walks, I didn't know how much noise I was living in until you stopped speaking to me. I told him, sometimes silence says everything. He nodded, and for the first time, I believed he really heard me. My studio has grown too. People started noticing my work, not because of who I married, but because of the rawness in it. The collection I've been working on for months now is called Quiet Justice. Each piece carries a story, subtle, patient, deliberate. One sculpture is a woman carved from marble, her mouth half open, her eyes steady. Another is a clock with no hands, just a heartbeat engraved where the ticking should be. And in the center of the collection sits my mother's necklace. It gleams again, not because it's been restored, but because I finally let it be seen. I placed it inside a glass case, surrounded by soft light, the kind that glows instead of glares.
Visitors pause when they see it.
Some lean closer, trying to read the inscription on the small brass plaque beside it. Inherited from fire. Returned in silence. They don't know the story, not really. They just feel it. And that's enough. When I stand there sometimes, after the gallery closes, I trace the outline of the necklace with my eyes and think of my mother.
She'd laugh if she knew how all of this turned out. How her quiet daughter became the storm no one saw coming. But she'd also remind me not to hold on too tightly to the storm itself.
Let it pass, she'd say. Then plant something in the calm it leaves behind. That's what I've done. I teach now, not just art, but presence. I tell my students that every creation, every stroke, every decision has two parts, the act and the pause that follows.
Most people forget the pause.
But that's where truth hides. That's where dignity lives. Because dignity is not about forgiveness or surrender.
It's about choice.
The choice to stand tall when you could easily destroy. The choice to be silent when your silence has already won. I remember the last time I saw Margaret's reflection, not her face, but her reflection, in a news photo taken months after the gala. She was walking down the steps of a courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a woman called to testify in another case. Her head was bowed, but her shoulders were straight. There was something human in that image, something stripped of armor. For a moment, I didn't see my enemy. I saw a woman who'd been humbled by her own reflection. I didn't hate her anymore. That surprised me. Hatred used to be fuel. It kept me sharp. But it also kept me chained to her. When I finally let it go, the air felt lighter. My world stopped spinning around what she did and started moving toward what I could do next. Sometimes I still wonder if she ever truly understood how deeply she hurt me, how that one charity theft ripped through generations of memory. But then I remember the empty jewelry box she sent, polished and pristine.
That was her answer.
Her silence said, I know. And my silence replied, I accept. That's the thing about revenge. Everyone thinks it's fire.
But real revenge is water. Patient. Relentless. It doesn't roar.
It seeps in quietly, reshaping everything in its path until one day, the landscape looks nothing like it did before. It took me years to understand that peace isn't a lack of justice. It is justice, when you choose it yourself. The night before my exhibition opened, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the necklace in its display case, remembering the day I first found out it was gone. I remembered the way my throat closed up, the helplessness that filled my lungs. And then I thought about how far I'd come from that moment. From the trembling girl who stood in Margaret's perfect mansion, trying to defend her mother's memory, to the woman who now stood surrounded by her own creations, her own name, her own voice. That's when I realized the greatest revenge isn't public humiliation. It's private evolution.
I didn't need her downfall.
I just needed my peace. On opening night, the gallery was full, journalists, collectors, art lovers, people from every walk of life. Evan stood beside me, his hand steady on my back. I saw faces I hadn't seen in years, some curious, some supportive, some pretending not to remember where they'd seen my name before. And then, through the crowd, I saw her.
Margaret. She didn't approach me. She didn't even come close.
She stood by the far wall, looking at the necklace in its glass case.
Her eyes softened.
She looked smaller than I remembered, not weaker, just human. And then, she smiled. Not the polished, rehearsed kind she'd mastered all her life, but a real one. The kind that says, I see you now. I nodded back, just once. And then she left. That was our peace treaty. No words, no tears, no audience. Just understanding. After that night, I didn't think about her much. Life moved forward.
It always does.
But sometimes, when I walk into my studio early in the morning, with the sunlight spilling over the necklace, I feel that same quiet strength ripple through me. The light hits the gold just right, and it gleams, not for attention, not for validation, but simply because that's what light and gold do. It's beautiful without needing to prove it. And that, I've learned, is the heart of quiet justice.
Not the roar of revenge.
Not the spectacle of downfall. But the slow, steady reclaiming of yourself.
That's the lesson I want people to take. That you can be kind and still demand respect. You can be gentle and still command power. You can choose silence and still be heard.
Because dignity, real dignity, isn't given.
It's built.
And once you have it, no one can take it away again. Every time I touch that necklace, I'm reminded that my mother's strength lives in me, that her grace outlasted the greed that tried to erase it.
The jewels were never just ornaments. They were symbols of endurance, of memory,
of quiet women who've had to fight their battles behind smiles. I think about all the people who've watched this story unfold, who've messaged me, written to me, told me it reminded them of their own silent wars. And I realize that's what stories are supposed to do. They don't fix the past. They free it. And maybe that's what I've been doing all along, freeing my story from the noise.
Because sometimes, justice doesn't sound like applause. It sounds like peace.
It looks like a necklace gleaming in morning light. It feels like forgiveness without forgetting. And it lives in the quiet, the kind that hums beneath everything once the chaos fades. Because sometimes, the softest voices deliver the loudest verdicts. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because out there, someone else needs to hear that quiet justice always wins.